Welcome to Train Signal. You're watching to virtualize or not to virtualize. That is the question. We're going to be talking about when Hyper-V is a good idea and when it's not. In this video, we're going to start off with just a quick refresher on virtualization. I just want to remind you of the basic core concepts and tenets. Then I'm going to talk to you about licensing and versions. There are some important things that you need to know before you start, just going out and buying versions of Server 2008 and thinking, hey, we're going to virtualize everything. There's some significant cost savings that I want to let you know about in terms of which version of Server 2008 that you may want to buy. Then we're going to talk about servers for president, candidates for virtualization, because not every server in your enterprise is going to be a good candidate for virtualization, and I'll tell you how to know which ones to go ahead and roll over and which ones not to. We're going to be talking about your virtualization migration tools. We're going to talk about 3 different tools that are going to be available for you, 2 of which are on the Microsoft exam objectives for 7647. However, there's one that's not, and it's one that I'm going to share with you out of my own experience. It's something that I've had a really good fortune with, and I'll show you what that is. Then we're going to talk about an example of a virtualization plan using, of course, Hank and Globomantics. So let's go ahead and let's start off with our quick refresher on virtualization. This isn't probably anything new to you by now, but basically when we're talking about virtualization, we're really talking about taking multiple servers, taking images of their hard drives, and essentially capturing them or creating them if you're creating brand new virtual machines, and storing them on a larger and probably more powerful server as virtual hard disks. That is really the basis for virtual machines because, like any other machine, if you don't have a hard disk, you don't have a computer, right? Well, in the case of virtualization, we take operating systems and literally use a portion of a hard drive as a virtual hard drive. They're actually technically flat files, and we can run an operating system in an emulator similar to those old Nintendo emulators that you may have downloaded illegally off the web. But the mechanism behind it is pretty much the same. We can actually pretend that we have more servers than what we really do. Now, there's a lot of virtualization solutions out there, and we'll probably see more to come. But let's go ahead and let's talk about Microsoft's virtualization solution, which is, of course, Hyper-V, right? And really, when you buy Server 2008, you really get a virtualization solution right out of the box. Now, there's a lot of advantages to Hyper-V and virtualization overall, but we're going to talk specifically about Hyper-V, obviously. First of all, creating and managing virtual machines in Server 2008 Hyper-V, it's really easy. The ease of administration is fantastic. Hardware costs are significantly reduced because multiple virtual machines can run on a single physical machine. So whereas you may have had 5 servers in the past, depending upon what those servers are doing and what their CPU and RAM utilization may be, you may be able to take 5 boxes and reduce them down to 1 box. The energy savings alone are really significant, right? So not only just the hardware costs, but also your power bill will go down as well. Now, Hyper-V licensing costs are included with the license cost of Windows Server 2008. Now, in terms of that license cost, you can buy Server 2008 without Hyper-V, and it will cost you $28 less. Woohoo! Oh, hey, $28. Yeah, it's pretty negligible in savings to buy Server 2008 without Hyper-V. So you might as well go ahead and pony up the extra $28 for it. I'm going to talk to you a little more about licensing and versions in just a few minutes, but before we do that, the nifty thing is that both 32-bit and 64-bit guest operating systems are supported, so we can actually run a Windows Vista client in Hyper-V. We can also run a Linux server in Hyper-V, and there's also others that are in the mix as well. Now, I just brought up a quick screen capture here for you for Hyper-V, and I just want to just give you a quick look at it. You've probably seen it before, or at least I hope you have, if you're watching the 7647 Enterprise Administrator video by now. But the graphical user interface is really nice. It's really easy to learn. Most of the controls are right here in one of the Hyper-V windows. It's really something that you're not going to have a hard time grasping if you haven't already started to play around with it. So a lot of good news in terms of this new feature of Server 2008. Alright, so that's just a quick refresher on Hyper-V. I know a lot of it you probably already know, but I want to go back through and just revisit licensing and versions. I want to review this with you so you know what you're getting before you run out and buy stuff. Okay, when you buy Standard Edition of Server 2008, you get a license for one physical host as well as one virtual host. Now, when I say Standard Edition, I'm also talking about 32 and 64-bit, just in case you were wondering. So with the Standard Edition of either 32 or 64-bit, you get one physical, one virtual. Now, when you buy the 64-bit Enterprise Edition, and by the way, this is the version that you really need to have if you're going to be running Hyper-V. All right, so even though technically if you buy the 32-bit Enterprise Edition, let me go ahead and put a 32 in here. If you buy the 32-bit Enterprise Edition, you still get these same licenses. So with Enterprise, you get one physical host and 4 virtual licenses as well. This is a really great option if you're starting to consolidate a small amount of servers, or you're going to be deploying a small amount of servers. All right, now here's the big one though. With the 64-bit Data Center Edition, you get unlimited virtual licenses. Now, when I say unlimited virtual licenses, this means unlimited virtual licenses for an Enterprise Edition, 64-bit, Standard Edition, 64-bit, 32-bit, whatever. But with 64-bit Data Center, I mean, you really get the whole kit and caboodle in terms of virtualization. So if you're going to be deploying a lot of servers, or you're going to be consolidating and upgrading a lot of Server 2003 machines, this might be the best go. However, you need to remember that Data Center is purchased in terms of licenses by the amount of processors that you're going to be running it on. So it's obviously going to be more expensive in the upfront costs. However, the unlimited virtual licenses option might really save you a lot of money in the long run. So something that you're going to want to keep in mind, if you're doing a small implementation, a 64-bit Enterprise license might give you just what you need, or maybe 2 or 3 of them. But if you're going to be doing a lot of virtualization and a lot of virtual deployments, the 64-bit Data Center Edition might be a better option and maybe more cost effective. Okay, let's start talking about now which servers are going to make for good candidates for virtualization. First of all, I'm going to make sure that I underline this because this is a really big deal. Do not virtualize your forest root domain controller, okay? I don't care what Microsoft says. I don't care what anybody else says. Don't do it. Your forest root domain controller has a lot of stuff to do. It's too critical of a machine to virtualize. So this is a bad idea. So your forest root domain controllers, knock those off your list right off the bat. What you're really going to be looking for are servers that are not RAM and CPU intensive. The reality is that there's a huge amount of servers in data centers everywhere that are not utilizing the hardware to its fullest capacity. And those are the servers that you really want to look for. Now, in order to identify some of those servers, you may have to break out Performance Monitor and really watch and maybe run a baseline and see how that server performs and what the average load is on that server. And that's obviously going to vary depending upon what that server's role is, how much that server is used. For example, your email server, I'm going to bet your email server is probably the busiest little box in your entire enterprise, or maybe several boxes. Email servers are probably going to be much more intensive in terms of resource use. Not a good option. However, maybe a secondary DNS server that doesn't get a lot of hits, yeah, that might be a good option for virtualization. Now, applications that require older server operating systems, you can actually run on virtual servers. So let's say you have an old Server 2000 box that has this application that you spent $10,000 on, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years ago. That application is absolutely vital to the lifeblood of your corporation. However, that box is sitting there, and you've tried to install that application on a 2003 box, a Server 2008 box, and it just will not run. Well, you can take that Server 2000 box, virtualize it, and run it on a Server 2008 machine as a virtual machine. You still get access to that application. You still get the cost savings in terms of hardware maintenance and energy cost savings, and you also get the snapshot capability. Snapshots are awesome, and I'm sure you probably have seen these before, but you can actually take a snapshot of a server and then revert that server back in time, and in case something blows up, you can actually revert it back to a previous state. So you actually get more features and more capability when you virtualize older servers than if you let it sit and run on a physical box. Now, virtual servers are fantastic for test environments. The nice thing about Hyper-V is that it not only supports server operating systems, but it will also support client operating systems, specifically for Vista. Vista runs really well on a Server 2008 Hyper-V machine. If you work for a software development company, Hyper-V might be the answer to your prayers in terms of being able to quickly and easily deploy test environments. If you couple Hyper-V with Windows deployment services, it is a fantastic solution for creating testing environments so that way your developers can bang around and hack around on the operating systems and the servers, and very little damage capability is present. You actually can reduce a lot of risk by creating private networks inside of Hyper-V and providing access to your developers via remote desktop for them to play around with it. So some fantastic advantages there for software developments, or maybe you're just testing new software and you're like, well, I'm not sure if this is going to work or not. Go ahead and deploy it as a virtual machine. If you don't like it, no big deal. You delete the virtual machine. Okay? Or you can revert your virtual machine back to a previous state before the application was installed. So these are good instances where you're going to want to think about either deploying or consolidating physical servers to virtual machines. All right, now, what servers specifically, what kind of examples might we use here? First of all, secondary DNS servers. A lot of secondary DNS servers are not that intensive in terms of CPU and RAM usage, so that might be a good option, might be a good candidate for virtualization. If you have a small branch office and you need multiple server roles on a single box, well, that might also be another good option for virtualization. Maybe you have a small branch office somewhere and there's 3 servers sitting in a closet somewhere just sucking up juice. You might be able to take those 3 servers and consolidate them to one more energy efficient machine. Windows deployment services. This is one of my favorites actually, and I've done this as well. And if you've seen my 7643 course, you know that the Windows deployment server that I used was actually a virtual machine. Let's face it, you're probably not going to be deploying servers and clients every single day, unless, of course, you are an implementation specialist and that's all you do is you build out networks all day long. But in a regular corporate environment, you're probably only going to deploy servers maybe 10% of the time tops, or maybe client distributions, of course, unless you're in like a classroom environment or you have a lot of test environments going on. You can actually create a Hyper-V Windows Deployment Services virtual machine. Save the virtual hard disk and those virtual machine files to a removable USB drive, and then when you don't need it, you can take that USB removable drive and stick it into a closet or a safe somewhere. And when you do need to deploy stuff, break out that hard drive, plug it in, load up that virtual machine into a Hyper-V environment, deploy your servers, deploy your clients, and then turn it off, unplug the USB drive, and put it back in the closet or the safe. So having portable solutions like that might really be a benefit to you, especially if you are an implementation specialist. But if you don't want to suck up a lot of your primary hard drive space, storing virtual machines on removable USB hard drives. Remember, when I'm talking about removable USB hard drives, I'm not talking about the little sticks. I'm talking about, like the 320 gigabyte removable drives, okay? But that might hopefully spur on some inspiration for you. Older operating systems, Windows Server 2000, 2003, you can even virtualize Windows NT boxes. These are good examples for virtualization. You know that older operating systems have less requirements. They're usually less memory hogs. So sometimes. I should probably qualify that. But nevertheless, if you have older applications running on older servers, those might be good candidates for virtualization. A lot of the hardware, as you know nowadays, is becoming more and more energy efficient. So if you have an old energy vampire box that it might be 10 years old and it's just sitting there sucking energy out of the socket like a kid with a pixie stick, well, that might be a good reason to migrate that physical server to a virtual server and save using more energy efficient hardware. All right, so there's just a few examples. There's a lot more, and I'm sure you're already starting to think about candidates that might be in your network. But let me talk to you about some tools that you can use for virtualization migration. Now, the first one I'm going to talk to you about is the VSMT, Virtual Server Migration Toolkit. Now, it's a free download, and it's supposed to be good for migrating small amounts of physical servers to virtual. However, this is not my favorite tool. I'm just going to be bluntly honest with you. This tool is actually for an older virtualization solution from Microsoft called Virtual Server 2005. And quite frankly, Virtual Server 2005 is not a bad beginning solution. I've known some folks who have deployed Virtual Server 2005 in production environments. They've had fairly decent success. However, Hyper-V is much more advanced and much more powerful. And while the virtual hard drives that Virtual Server 2005 creates are compatible with Hyper-V, this particular tool, which by the way is what it's designed for, is designed to migrate a physical server to a Server 2005 virtual hard drive implementation. I've really had some really frustrating moments with this tool. So this is not my recommendation to you. So let me just go ahead and I'm gonna put a big X in that one. Not my favorite tool. But just so you know, the VSMT was actually mentioned in the exam objectives, so I thought I'd mention it here. But here's my new favorite tool. If you have the dollars for it, the System Center Virtual Machine Manager. It's a much stronger migration solution. It's going to cost you some money, okay? But it's worth every penny. It's very easy to use, has a great graphical user interface, has a lot more capability than the Server 2008 Hyper-V interface. So if you can get your hands on this, go for it. Sir, you will not be sorry. It's a fantastic tool, and it actually has functionality built right in for migrating physical machines to virtual. Now, let's say you can't necessarily afford System Center Virtual Machine Manager. Here's my solution, and I've had a lot of great success with this. Use Windows Deployment Services. So what you're going to do is you're going to set up a WDS server, run sysprep on whatever server you're going to migrate. You're going to capture that hard drive as an image in WDS and then redeploy that image in a virtual environment such as Hyper-V. So this is a solution that is available to you right out of the box with Server 2008, and it's going to be pretty successful for you. I can pretty much guarantee. I've practiced and utilized this in a lot of different scenarios. This is really my recommendation to you if you cannot afford the System Center Virtual Machine Manager. Now, by now, you should know how to create capture images and use Windows Deployment Services. And if you need a quick refresher, in my 7643 Applications Infrastructure video series, I teach you this step by step, okay? Now, even though you probably already know how to use WDS to capture an image, let me go ahead and just bounce on over to a Server 2003 box. Let me go ahead and just walk you through the capture process real quick, and let me show you how it's done. So here we are over on a Server 2003 machine, and of course the same basic principle is going to work for Server 2008 as well, except for Server 2008, just so you know, all you really have to do is go to the Start menu and in the search box type sysprep. Well, we're going to do the exact same thing here on Server 2003, just to really refresh your memory, or in case you haven't ever worked in Server 2003. And I should mention to you here real quick. Let me go to the properties. What I'm working with here is Windows Server 2003 R2 Service Pack 2. Now, you don't have to necessarily have R2 running, but you do need to have Service Pack 2 in order for a virtualization scenario to work properly. If you're working with an older version of Server 2003, it's probably not going to go so well. You'll probably actually end up blue screening out of your redeployment of the server. All right, so we have the Server 2003 Service Pack 2 machine here. What we're going to do next is we're going to go to the Start menu, to My Computer, and then to the CD-ROM drive. Now, in the CD-ROM drive, what I have is actually the Server 2003 installation disk. I'll go ahead and I'll close it. I'm going to right-click on it and go to Explore instead. We're going to go to the Support folder. And inside of the Support folder, we find Tools. And here inside of Tools, we find Deploy.cab. We're going to open up Deploy.cab. And there are two tools we're actually going to extract out of this archive. We're going to extract setupcl.exe and sysprep.exe. However, I should also mention to you that if you want to use an answer file along with your redeployment of the server, you're going to need to use setupmgr.exe. Now I'm going to go for the quick, fast, and dirty version, so I'm going to go ahead and open up setupcl.exe. I'm going to extract it to a new folder on the desktop, and I'm just going to call this new folder sysprep. That'll be good enough. And then go ahead and extract both of these tools to that particular folder. So now I've got those two tools. I'm going to go ahead and close up here, and that's all we needed from the 2003 installation disk. I'm going to go into sysprep, and now I'm going to double click on sysprep.exe, tell it OK. And now I'm just going to simply select a couple of options here in the System Prep tool. I'm going to make sure that the shutdown mode is set to reboot, so that way when we're done doing the sysprep operation on this particular machine, we'll reboot, then we'll use the Pixie boot. We'll actually reboot from the Windows deployment server machine, and we'll use a capture image. Now, of course, all of this you should already know how to set up from your application infrastructure studies. Let's go ahead and we'll put a check mark here in all of these guys, and we'll hit reseal. Now, I want to mention to you that if you do not use the System Prep tool, you will not be able to actually utilize the WDS stuff. You have to run sysprep in order to be able to capture the volume using Windows deployment services. And what that's going to mean is that this may not necessarily be the absolute best solution for your particular needs, especially if you have a server that is absolutely necessary that you have to keep up and running the entire time. Alright, so I've rebooted the machine here, and now I need to make sure that I hit F12 to go into Network Service Boot. And as I'm doing that, I should probably tell you that I already have set up a Windows deployment server. You should know how to do that already. Not going to repeat that. Now, this is a 64-bit edition of Server 2003. And you see here that I've actually created a couple of different boot images. These x86 and x64, these are deployment images. Grab 32-bit and Grab It 64-bit are my capture images. I'm going to use the 64-bit Grab It image that I've created earlier. And by the way, if you are not familiar with Windows Deployment Services, you need to get familiar with Windows Deployment Services. That should already be well under your belt. But as you're going to be seeing here, the process to grab a Windows 2003 image for use in Windows Deployment Services, especially when you're redeploying to a virtual machine, it's pretty much identical to grabbing and redeploying an image for Server 2008. You just have to make sure that you run sysprep, and I've shown you how to do that already. And now what we should be seeing here is just the good old Windows Deployment Services utilities show up here, the boot image that we are already familiar with. And I'm going to be capturing volume C, and the image name, I'm going to call this 2K3 VM. We'll call it that. And for my image description, I'm going to call this for redeployment as a Hyper-V VM. There we go. And we'll go down to next and hit the enter key. Now I need to specify the name and location, just like we always do with capturing an image. And I'm just going to store it on the C drive real quick. Looks like I have plenty of room free on the C drive. So I'm going to go ahead and name the file that I'm capturing here 2K3VM as well. And we'll save that guy. We're also going to upload the image to the WDS server here. And then we'll type the server name here, and that is Globo WDS. And of course, this is a server that I obviously have set up previously. And so I'm going to go ahead and try to connect to that. Now, by the way, if Globo WDS doesn't work, then I may have to put in the fully qualified domain name. But we'll see if the NetBIOS name gets me there first. Yep, there we go. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and log into Globo WDS using Globomantic/Supercoach or whatever administrative credentials that you might have available there. And what we should be able to do is get this image group name. Let me go ahead and see if I can draw on the screen here for a second. What should come available here in just a few moments is this image group name. Now, you will want to probably create a separate image group in your Windows Deployment Services server, specifically for Server 2003 machines, or Server 2003 images, I really should say. And there we go. Now it's available to us. That's neat. So we connected A-OK. So I have the option of putting this image into either the Server 2K8 or Server 2K3. Of course, we'll put it into 2K3, tab over, and press the Enter key to finish. Oh, looks like I have an image there already because I was practicing. We want to replace it. Yeah, sure, we'll go ahead and we'll replace that guy. And now it's going to sit here and spin. And I'm going to go get a cup of coffee while this guy scoops up the contents of the hard drive and turns it into a .wim file. And as soon as it's done, I will be right back and I'll show you the next step. All right, so the image capture has completed successfully now. So I'm going to go ahead and close this particular server. Now, just so you know, as soon as this guy reboots, what's going to end up happening is that all the unique information has been stripped out. And so because it's been stripped out, I would actually have to recreate the machine name, reinsert the license key, and all that good stuff. But rather than show you how to do that, because remember, we want to virtualize the server, what we're going to do next is we're going to move back over to Hyper-V. We're going to create a new virtual machine and then redeploy that Server 2003 in a virtual machine environment. All right, so here we are over on Hyper-V Globo, and we're going to create a new virtual machine real quick here on our Hyper-V machine. And this will only take just a second because it's really super easy. We're going to call this guy Win2K3 VM. We're going to store this guy on the G drive because remember, you never store your virtual machine files on your system volume. We'll tell it next. I'll leave it at 512 megabytes for the time being and hit next. We're going to go ahead and specify a virtual network that was created actually earlier during the installation process of Hyper-V and tell it next. We're going to create a new virtual hard disk. That'll be fine. Tell it next. And we're going to install an operating system from a network-based installation server, which is, of course, our Windows deployment server. We're going to tell it next, and we'll tell it finish, and it should start that virtual machine up here pretty much instantaneously. All right, there we go. And we want to make sure that we are pressing F12 in order to get to our network service boot. We want to make sure we're installing from our Windows deployment server. Now, since this is a 64-bit implementation, we'll use our Windows Longhorn setup for 64-bit. And yes, you can use the Server 2008 boot image, even if it is Server 2003. That's A-OK. So I'm going to go ahead and press the Enter key. And we're going to wait here for just a second while it does load up the files. And it might take just a little bit for that to happen, so you might see time run just a little faster in this section of the video as I edit some stuff out. And Shazam, through the magic of editing, we have moved forward in time about a minute and a half here while this guy loaded up the installation boot files here. And so from here on out, it's really pretty much more of a standard deployment kind of scenario. I'll go ahead and I'll walk us through it anyway, because, well, we're in the middle of it, so why not go ahead and record the rest of the deployment scenario. I'm going to go ahead and use the keyboard for this, and we'll tab down to Next. It's going to ask for some credentials here, so we'll go ahead and we'll log in with our administrative credentials of SuperCoach, and go ahead and put that in. Oh, I have an extra VM in there. See, this one was for practice, and this one was the one that we just created. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and use this particular installation image, and we'll go ahead and we'll tab down and hit the Enter key for Next. And now it's going to sit here and spin for a fair amount of time, depending upon what the size of the actual image is and how much network throughput you have available to you, and so forth. Now, just so you know, if you're planning on utilizing this virtualization strategy of grabbing the image with Windows Deployment Services and then redeploying, make sure that you are actually doing this operation when there isn't anyone around. Okay? Not because it might blow up on you, but more so because you have to take down that server. So if folks are trying to use or need the services that that particular Windows Server 2003 provides, while you're virtualizing it, they're probably going to be very unhappy. And that's not really our job, is it? Our job is to make our users happy. So make sure that you are virtualizing your machines if you're going to utilize this method during off hours. And again, if you need to maintain that server to be on all the time, even during the virtualization process, you're probably going to need the System Center Virtual Machine Manager. All right, I'm going to go ahead and hit the pause button right now while this guy goes ahead and loads up our new Server 2003 image, and then I'll bring you back and show you the redeployment process right after this. All right, so moving on to the next step of our redeployment process here to our virtual machine. We're going to have to walk through the Windows Setup Wizard if we didn't utilize an answer file. And if you're only virtualizing one or two servers, you may not need to do that. You can go ahead and simply walk through the little installation setup, whiz bang, no big deal. It's not going to take you that long. And I should probably mention here at this point to you too, is that one of my colleagues, David Davis, actually refers to virtualization less as a destination and more as a journey. You might try to virtualize a couple servers and it might blow up in your face. So, be cautious, be very careful about trying to implement virtualization immediately. The general rule of thumb is that if it is an absolutely vital server, you may want to leave it alone. If it's a server that a lot of people are using, just as we've talked about previously, you may want to not virtualize that particular machine. All right, so we can go ahead and specify any regional or language options here. I'm going to go ahead and leave those at the default, so we can always change those later on. And now let's go ahead and we'll put in here our quick information, press the Enter key, and then we would actually put in our product key. And rather than do that, I can actually skip that here and simply utilize the trial version. Of course, obviously, at this stage in the game, you would put in your own product key that you bought from Microsoft. I'm going to tell it no. And then we would specify any number of connections that we might need here. And I think I initially had this set to 10 when I originally created this server. Tell it next. And then we're going to call this guy server 2K3 Globo, or whatever the original name of the server is. Now I want to stress that to you here. Make sure you're using the same name as you previously did. Now, of course, if you use the exact same name, what you might have to end up doing is you might have to end up going into your Active Directory and deleting any old computer accounts and then reestablishing this one, because when we ran sysprep for the virtualization process, sysprep removed all the unique information, including the computer name, the security identifier for this particular machine, as well as its domain membership. So you're going to have to probably go in and make some adjustments there. We're going to go ahead and tell it next, and it's going to sit here and install a few items here and there. and shouldn't take very long. And now we come to the screen that we would expect to see right after a new deployment of Server 2003. Looks like it is rebooting here for us. And then as soon as we see that initial logon screen, we'll go ahead and we'll call it quits for this demonstration. But I did want to show you that this is possible, and you can utilize Windows Deployment Services to go ahead and grab whatever Windows Server 2003 machines that you need. And there we go. And now we can go ahead and do a Control-Alt-Delete. But of course, since this is a virtual machine, we have to resize our screen and click on the Control-Alt-Delete button. We'll resize it, and we'll put in our new administrator password. There we go. Now, since we used sysprep and we resealed that particular image of the operating system, it's going to have to reset up a lot of stuff. But you'll notice here that my sysprep folder is still present on the hard drive. And that is due to the fact that whatever you have on the C drive that you are virtualizing, it's going to come right along with your image. All right, so that ends our quick tutorial on how to grab a Server 2003 machine and virtualize it using Hyper-V and Windows Deployment Server. Let's go back to the slides. All right, so let's go ahead and let's move on to our Globomantics virtualization plan. Hank goes to a conference, and every time Hank goes to a conference, he comes back with such great, fantastic ideas for you to implement. So at a conference for executives who have no idea about IT, but who want to, Hank learns about virtualization, and probably more importantly, how the power company is giving rebates for taking servers off of the power grid. Of course, since there is money involved, Hank wants you to start thinking about which servers in the current data centers can be virtualized to take advantage of the rebates. So what we're going to start doing is we're going to start by taking a look at the New York data center and see which servers there are candidates for virtualization. So here's what we've got. We've got 7 servers in our current New York data center, and Hank is going to spring for one nice big fat box with 8 gig of RAM, 2 300 megabyte hard drives, and a 2.7 gigahertz dual core CPU. That should be enough for us to run Hyper-V on. We shouldn't have a problem with that. Of course, remember that we need to install Server 2008 64-bit Enterprise Edition on this box if we're going to be doing a lot of Hyper-V stuff. Let's see what we got here. We got NYDC1. This is our forced root DC, which is Server 2008. Is this a good candidate for virtualization? Oh, let's stop and let's remember our rules. No, 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 no. This is not a candidate for virtualization, right? It's a forced root DC. That guy needs to be a standalone. The next is a second floor secondary domain controller. Is this a candidate? Well, it is a secondary DC. So this one is a maybe. All right, we could probably get away with virtualizing this guy, but let's see what else we got here. A file server, second floor file server. Is this going to be a good candidate? Well, that's going to depend upon the amount of files that actually live on the hard drive. This guy is a Server 2003 machine, so we're probably going to be utilizing less resources than what we maybe have originally anticipated when we bought the hardware. So this one, we're probably going to say yes. All right. Unless, of course, there's like a terabyte of data on the file server, then that's no. You're not going to be virtualizing terabytes of data, at least yet. Okay. All right, our Windows deployment server here, WDS1. It's a Server 2008 box. Yeah, absolutely. A Windows deployment server is a good option for virtualization. Let's go over here. NY Exchange 1, our Exchange server. What do you think? No, not a good candidate for virtualization. An email server is critical to the lifeblood of your company. It's probably going to be the busiest box in your whole network. We're not going to virtualize this guy. All right, how about a DNS server? Probably a secondary DNS server from look at it. Looks like it's on the second floor. Is this going to be a good candidate? Yeah, that's actually probably going to be a pretty good candidate for virtualization. Now, this one over here, we have an application server, NYApp1, and this one I'm probably going to say no to. All right? Application servers have a tendency to be very hardware intensive. very RAM and CPU intensive. So that's probably not going to be a very good candidate to virtualize. All right, so let's go ahead and let's take away the ink here, and let's go ahead and have a better visual representation of the servers we are going to virtualize. We're going to go ahead and virtualize the file server, assuming that there is not like a terabyte of data on it, and that's something that we're going to have to look at. Our second floor DC, our secondary DC, since this is just a replica of the Active Directory database, yeah, this one we could probably get away with virtualizing okay. Our second floor DNS server, yeah, that's going to be a good bet. And of course, our WDS server. Now, before we virtualize any one of these, just so you know, with the exception of maybe the Windows deployment server, we're probably going to want to break out Performance Monitor and watch these 3 servers over the course of maybe a week and make sure that they are not CPU and RAM intensive. Probably the biggest question that I would have would be on the secondary DC, and see how much work that guy actually does do before virtualizing it. But I think we have a pretty good initial plan here, and in fact our initial plan has actually allowed us to consolidate 7 servers down to 4 servers. So we have these 3 servers that we're going to leave as standalone because they are CPU and RAM intensive. Then we're going to take these 4 guys and we're going to consolidate them all onto one machine, and that's going to save us some hardware maintenance costs. It's going to save us some energy costs. It's going to provide us with the ability to keep snapshots of the servers. So there's a lot of advantages for us to consolidate. Now, in terms of like power rebates from the power company, is taking these 4 servers or consolidating these 4 servers into one really going to probably give you a huge amount of cash? Probably not. You know, if you're consolidating, say, 300 servers, then that's a different story. But if you're consolidating 3 servers or 4 servers, probably not a lot of rebate money involved in that. All right, so that is our plan. Let's go ahead and let's wrap this guy up here. After watching this video, you should be able to describe a little bit about what virtualization is, like you couldn't already, right? You should be able to describe the benefits of virtualization so you can sell this to your boss. Determine which servers will make good candidates to migrate from physical to virtual. Remember, if there's a question on whether or not a server is a good match for virtualization, if it's an older server, you should probably run a performance baseline on it and just kind of watch the RAM and CPU usage over maybe a week or 2. Make sure that it's not a huge RAM hog so that it doesn't interfere with any other virtual machines. Okay. Now, also, you should be able to describe at least some of the tools used for migration of physical machines to virtual machines. Remember, if you can't afford System Center Virtual Machine Manager, and by the way, System Center Virtual Machine Manager, we're going to talk more about it later on in this particular course, but for right now, what I want you to understand about it is that it's massively cool, but it's really best for large implementations. If you're going to have, let's say, in the neighborhood of 25 to 100 virtual servers or virtual machines running around in your enterprise, it's probably going to be a really good investment for you. If you have 5, then that may not necessarily be the best investment. And of course, I talked to you about my Windows Deployment Services solution, and that may be best for migrating maybe a small amount of servers to virtual machines. All right, that wraps this video up. I'll see you in the next one.